learned from them was a couple things. That when sex offenders are subject to these residency restrictions, as happened in the city of Greeley, there was literally only a couple of places they could actually lawfully live in the city of Greeley without violating some of those restrictions. The studies that were conducted by the management board in the white paper that they produced found that when you force sex offenders out of their homes, their family, their support systems, their jobs, and push them away from the very support that they have that keeps them, stable in their community, the tendency to reoffend increases. Another finding was that the sex offenders would tend to go underground and we would lose track of them. They would simply not register and they would still live wherever they got. So based on those findings and their recommendations, members of the Sex Offender Management Board presented with me to then City Council, and my recommendation at that time was I don't see value in imposing that because it would, based on the findings, increase the threat to people in our community. So Council at that time supported it, and I can tell you that since we've imposed that, a couple things. We increased our face time with our registered sex offenders that move into Evans. So the state of Colorado, there's different classes of sex offenders in Colorado, and they have to register and re-register either annually, semi-annually, or quarterly, depending on the seriousness of their offense, their original offense. And we also have a classification of sexually violent predator. So they have to just come into the police department, usually annually, and re-register with us. And then we are required by state law, the police, to do a physical check and confirm their residency once a year. But when we decided not to impose the residency restrictions, the Evans Police Department, we physically confirm their residency quarterly. So we go out physically and confirm that our sex offenders are where they say they're supposed to be. If they're not, we issue a warrant for their arrest when we pick them up. So we really have a pretty robust system of keeping tabs, if you will, on our sex offenders. And I can also tell you anecdotally, since I've been here, we have not had a sex offender reoffend. So, the national rate for recidivism on sex offenders is between 5 and 15%. We literally have not had a single one reoffend since I've been here. I think the national average is around 6% recidivism rate for these folks. And my recommendation today is the same. I don't know that there's going to be value in instituting residency restrictions since there isn't a palpable threat that I can see to our community, and we haven't had a threat based on how we manage them. What am I missing, John?
How many of the most serious class of offender, I don't know if I'm using this right, but the sexual predator,
sure,
do we have?
Right now we have 81 registered sex offenders in Evans, and 2 of them are classified as sexually violent predators. So we keep tabs on them a little bit more regularly, of course, than others. Both of these individuals that are sexually violent predators were interfamily offenses, which also lessens the chance that they're a threat to the community at large. Not to say it can't happen, obviously, but we have not had issues, and we've probably had 4 or 5 sexually violent predators come and go in Evans since I've been here. And again, no reoffenses on any of them.
Do you know how many Greeley has?
I don't, Mayor. I can find out for you.
I'd be curious on that, because it sounds like if they have the restrictions, and you said there's just not a lot of room for them to be able to live, or we just get them all.
Right.
Because they all just come here now because you can't live in Greeley.
We had, I think when they instituted it, we had somewhere around 40 or 50 sex offenders at the time, and we've doubled it in the last decade, 12 years. We've doubled that population.
Questions for Chief Grant or Jim?
So when that new recommendation came out, was there any pushback from any of the citizens on it? Restrictions put in on it? Was there any those that live near the schools that were, fearing for their safety in the community living there? Was there any citizen feedback that came to council, came to yourself that said, hey, we really don't want this?
None that I recall.
I just feel that if we are not having a big problem here, if they are registered, we don't have a high rate of recidivism, and that as long as the neighbors, I mean, it's the law that the neighbors have to be notified. I'm correct in assuming that, remembering that, but I don't see a need to move other than to offer as much support as we can to any concern.
Fred?
Well, this might possibly allow them to have the counseling they need and become a productive member of society. I am concerned when they are closer to schools and possibly they're more tempted, I guess is the word I want to say, to reoffend. But hopefully this process of allowing them to get the counseling they need and possibly live with family members and obtain a job is helping curtail the problem. So I do have some concerns when they get too close to schools, especially grade schools and stuff. So.
I have small children, so it's a huge concern to me because if I had, I have a home that I'm purchasing, and next to me there's a sexually violent predator. I mean, I don't have that luxury. So that is a concern to me. And you did answer because one of the questions I had was, any of these, sexual offenders, have they reoffended? And you mentioned that there isn't. So I do applaud, the work that you're doing. But I would like to see, I know it's 1,000 feet, but I would like to see, like, how it would look in the city of Evans if we had something like this. And, like, in essence, what it would look like. And if, and how would it look for, this population within Evans if we were to put this in place, like where they reside, in which areas would be feasible for them to live in essence. But I also would like to see for sure, like, I don't know, just schools that I have an issue, especially when I think of Union Colony. I mean, unfortunately that school is not in a residential area. It's in a kind of business area, at least I tend to think, just based off what's around it, and considering that we have, the homeless shelter there, we have Sunrise Clinic, which it tends to get a lot of traffic. That area definitely does concern me, and it's close to the highway, so that's an issue for me as well. And then parks also. I mean, my kids go to parks. All the kids go to parks, and as is, we live in a time where kids just can't be kids. You can't just have a child walk to a park like before. And so that concerns me. So I would like to see how it would look. And I would also like to see it considered, having some kind of restriction within the city of Evans.
I would also like to know Greeley's numbers if we could versus, and I know there's a difference in population, so maybe if we could get those ratios, that way we have a good comparison. My question is, I know that we have to send out letters and that when they get in. Are there not restrictions already when they get that, when they're convicted and they have to register and then we send out the letters? Are there not already restrictions built in about how far and where? And if not, then yes, I would be definitely willing to look into that.
To answer your question, the state does not regulate any residency restrictions on paroled sex offenders. The only ones we have to do notifications on, community notifications on, are the sexually violent predators. The rest of them, all we do is, we don't, the state puts them on a map and anybody can have access to that map.
And just so you know, I do agree with my fellow council member here. I would like to see something. I'm not saying, maybe as far as Greeley, but I would like to see something, especially Union Colony. I think that would be a good idea. So I'd just be interested in all that information, please.
Councilwoman Castle, can you hear us okay?
Not hearing her.
She's unmuted. We can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
Try it again.
Councilwoman Castle, can you hear us? Okay, you're up.
We can't hear her, the mayor. Who was?
Let's try it.
We can't hear you, Amanda. Do you have it on mute?
He's not muted.
Can she,
I'm back to you in just a second, okay, Amanda?
can she add a chat and then you can,
Get a couple more.
I just had a question. I know that we're focused on the children, but we are also included with the sexual and violent predators, adults too. Is there a difference on how they are treated coming into the community, whether it's a sexual child predator or a sexual adult predator?
I don't think so in terms of community notification, but I can tell you that people that would get that classification are under a higher scrutiny by parole probation. I know they get contacted more, they have more contact with their support and counselor services, and they have more restrictions put on them by the state, just not residents.
I just had a question. So I know you guys do checks as well. Do you usually conduct that in conjunction with the parole probation officer? Because I know that as the probation officer, I would either go with an officer to somebody's house, or I would a dispatch and say, hey, I'm a probation officer, and we'll be at this address doing a check-in with my clients. Do you usually do that together, or do you do that independently of your probation or parole officer?
We do our, for Evans PD, we do our separate from parole and probation, but if they do call us, we do go with them if they want us to attend. But
so they're probably getting checked more than just the quarterly or semi-annually because they're doing probation or parole officers. I would be inclined to see something to see what it looks like. I mean, I'd like to see something like saying either way how it would go on it, but I would like to see something.
Councilwoman Castle, is it working yet?
Beth, any thoughts?
I'm not sure. It was working earlier when we tested, so I'm not sure why.
Get it fixed shortly for you, man. If not, I'll put you on my phone. So I 100% want to see something on this. The first thing that scares me is that Greeley has something that we don't, and I feel like what if they confront them? I think, I can't find a place to live here. Right across the street, they're not doing it. Let's go over there. So I want to see something there. As well as Councilman Johnson, Castle, and Mayor Pro Tem here have 2 small children. I would, I'm not wanting to, I demand that we keep these kind of people away from our kids. Everybody's kids, they're our most precious item. And I don't feel bad for them if they can't find a place to live. So I'm more than adamant that I'd like to see something. Whatever that is, I'm looking at options on what it is. I'd like to see something at least for the temperature increase. That's what I say.
So, trying to synthesize, I'm hearing, oh, sorry, Mayor, I think.
Go ahead,
I think that map, we've already got a map from when we were looking at the marijuana issue. And if I remember correctly, 1,000 feet pretty much restricts restricted marijuana sales to just along the I-85 corridor, so that would really seems like it would be super restrictive in Evans. Yeah, I agree. I think there should be some limit, but I think if we tried to go like Greeley with 1,000 feet, like I said, I think that was the only place we could find for marijuana sales would be along the I-85 corridor. That's all. That's the only place they could live because of proximity to schools and parks and different things. So, I don't know.
Councilwoman Castle, you got anything to add to this?
Jumped off.
I Really, my thoughts are the same as most here, that I would like to see something done. I think while I appreciate the efforts that have been made and the fact that we haven't had anybody reoffend, I think it's in the best interest of our community to ensure that we protect those that are most vulnerable.
Thanks, Councilmember Castle.
Right.
Give you guys enough direction.
I'm hearing 1,000 feet from schools and parks. Any other features that you'd like to include?
I would like whatever Greeley has.
Yeah,
Whatever Greeley
I'd
has.
say 1,000 or 1,500.
So you'd like us we could just look at what Greeley's regs are and match those distances and start.
That's what we can bring up.
Bring that back.
We'll go from there, yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll do it.
Anybody have anything else to add there?
I don't.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, this is where I'm going to get off script here. We're going to go to neighborhood traffic calming policy discussions. I'll turn it back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll find my prompt.
Yes.
Take a minute. This is an issue that we've been working on, so you can right over here. Yes. You guys want the chair here? That works. They need to be able to see and hear you. Let me look for my. Okay. Traffic calming is an issue that was raised 4 to 6 weeks ago by a group of citizens regarding an area where it was 32nd went into 34th Street west of 35th Avenue. Traffic calming concerns and traffic calming requests are concerns that we hear a lot. So we know that as we move into specific solutions for specific neighborhoods, it's probably a good idea that we have a policy approach that can be applied citywide, and that there's some shared understanding among the city council and staff for how we respond to those speed and other traffic concerns in our neighborhoods, especially as if we start to implement traffic calming physical solutions. There will likely be requests for more. So tonight's work session is really about the policy approach, less about any particular situation or solution in town. So we will be coming forward to you in the next 2 meetings with specific recommendations on the 32nd and 34th Street issues. But tonight is really more about a citywide approach that we'd like your feedback on, so that as we start to move forward with either the 32nd Street problem or others, we have some consistent approach to those kinds of requests and issues. So tonight I'm joined up here by our city engineer, Mark Oberschmidt, who's on point for staff on this issue. And then we also have our traffic engineers who are working on this for us, Martina Wilkinson and Joe Olson, both from Next Phase Engineering. So they've worked with our staff to put together this kind of draft policy for your consideration, and I'll turn it over to them now for an overview of where we think we're going. Take it away.
Terrific. Thanks, Jim. Good evening, Mayor Rudy, members of council. As Jim had mentioned, my name is Martina Wilkinson. I'm here today with Joe Olson. We're with Next Phase Engineering, and we are supporting city staff and the greater Evans community with a wide range of traffic engineering challenges that you may have, from now going forward. In future months, you likely won't see both of us here. We want to make the best use of your finances. But just for this evening, we thought it would be a good idea to introduce both of us and go from there. Both of us are traffic engineers by profession. We have literally decades of experience in traffic operations at a state level, at a county level, and then working in the public sector at a local level as well. We have a fair amount of experience in traffic calming. Joe started the program and ran it for the city of Longmont. I ran the program for Larimer County, and then together we managed the program with the city of Fort Collins. So this is not an unfamiliar topic for us this evening. So tonight's presentation will give you, it'll be relatively succinct. We have about a dozen slides or so. We'll give you an overview of neighborhood traffic issues and some of the challenges that go with that. We'll talk about what an outline of a traffic calming program would look like. We'll review some of the early information that we've gotten back from 32nd Street and Pleasant Acres and how that might fit into an overall program, sort of as a pilot project. And then obviously, it's a work session we offer. We'll look forward to the questions and the discussions that go with that. So neighborhood traffic is a challenge. It is frustrating, it is concerning, and it is common. It is something that we see in so many different areas. From an engineering perspective and from a statistical standpoint, unfortunately, reported crashes on the local road system, and thankfully, especially severe reported crashes, are rare. But the risk is not zero, and the anxiety that residents feel is real, and it affects the quality of life in neighborhoods. And that's really where we can start talking about what does a neighborhood traffic program look like. We wish that there was sort of that silver bullet or a simple solution, and the interest in doing something is really understandable. What we have found is that sometimes that something that we would do was not proven to be effective. A lot of times it would make us feel better for a little bit because we did something, but the reality is it really didn't move the needle on vehicle speeds in neighborhoods. What we have found is that traffic calming programs can be successful, they can be effective, but unlike a single item to fix the issue, it really requires this collaborative effort, this multi-pronged approach that embodies all those screen, and an effort that occurs from both the city and the residents, sort of to collectively address these issues.
So when we talk about a traffic calming program, what are we trying to accomplish? And really, when we talk about goals for the program, obviously the big thing is we want to make people drive more civilly in neighborhoods, right? We want them to slow down, we want them to obey traffic control devices, those types of things. And what comes from that then is improved neighborhood livability or quality of life for the residents. And so those are the big goals of the program. From a city perspective, we want to make sure that we're ensuring that we're getting a good bang for our buck with the money that we're spending or investing to try to mitigate traffic in neighborhoods. And so it's important to have a program that allows you to evaluate and prioritize to make sure you're spending money wisely in that regard. You'll see one up there about educating residents, and that's a good segue into the next slide. Because when we start talking about actual traffic mitigation tools, we divide our toolbox up into two things. We put them in as what we call level 1 devices or level 2 devices, and there's no magic to those names, but basically level 1 devices are things like education efforts. A lot of times, especially on a local street where a lot of the people who are not driving well are residents, just bringing that to people's attention is enough to change behaviors. You have a neighborhood meeting, and the conversation goes to the 16-year-old kid who's every day driving badly in the neighborhood, and all of a sudden their parents are there and they find out about it, and that can solve that problem just like that. So those education things like yard signs, neighborhood, the speed displays, things like that can actually be effective tools for reducing speeding in neighborhoods. Enforcement obviously is a tool that we would put in this level 1 bucket. And then also, really more non-intrusive engineering options, sometimes revised striping, reduce speed limit school zones, permanent radar feedback signs versus the trailers. And then that last one on there is important too, is improving adjacent arterials. One of the best traffic calming tools we can have on a street where there's a lot of cut-through traffic because they're trying to avoid congestion on the arterials, is to make the arterial streets work better. And so that's something that we think about when we're looking at this as well. When we start talking about the level 2 tools, those are the things that you more often think of as traffic mitigation tools. Those are the changes to the street, the little mini traffic circles or chicanes or bulb outs. Those are all horizontal things, making drivers move around horizontally, right? And then the other ones are vertical elements, which we all know as speed bumps or speed humps or speed tables is really probably what you see more often now in neighborhoods. Those level 2 measures can really be effective at reducing speeds in neighborhoods, but I have to caveat that by saying that there has to be people speeding to begin with, right? If you're trying to go from 30 to 25 or 35 to 25, those devices can do that. But if you're trying to go from 20 to 15 or 15 to 10, they're probably not going to be able to have that kind of success. And so that's why we get into that evaluating and things like that I'll talk about in a second to make sure that they make sense to use. Level 2 devices are obviously more expensive than the education and the other level 1 types of things. If we kind of lump those all together, the speed tables tend to be the least expensive and probably the most cost effective. And so if you're going into retrofit a street, so if you're talking about going in and retrofitting an existing street, the most commonly used device would be those speed tables to try to do that because they're cost effective. The last thing though on those first 3 bullets is important. These things are popular. You get a lot of requests for them if you go down the road of using physical mitigation devices. You'll get a lot of requests for them, but they aren't universally accepted, and they make some people mad. And so the key thing, if you go down the path of using physical devices, is to make sure that your program has a process to build consensus within the neighborhood before anything gets built. There's been a lot of traffic mitigation programs around the country that were scuttled when they didn't take that step, put something in, and then everybody that's driving down the street is honking their horn every time they go over a bump, kind of a thing. And so that's an important part of the program if you decide to go that way. Not every community does level 2 tools. A lot of communities or some communities will just do level 1 tools and won't go down the path of the physical devices. If we are going to do the physical devices, really the first step, like I talked about, is doing some kind of an evaluation to understand what you've got on the street, to make sure that it makes sense to do those kinds of physical devices. And then the second part there is making sure that there's ownership within the neighborhood, that it's something that they want to do. And typically what we would recommend is some kind of a petition process that the city can help them get organized and assist with what they need to do, but then the neighbors have to go out and actually collect the signatures to make sure that there's truly consensus on the street, so there's no surprises the day that the bumps are going in and all of a sudden somebody's mad. We put a slide in here to kind of talk about what's not in the toolbox. As Martina mentioned, this is a really challenging issue, and a lot of times, the things that people want are more signs, more pavement markings, rumble strips, drainage pans, all those things are up there. All of those things either cause more problems than they solve, or they don't work at all. And so they aren't really an effective use of again, the city's resources as far as trying to deal with a problem on a street. And again, we don't want to do something that makes something worse.
So that brings us to, if the decision is for the city of Evans to move forward with some kind of a program in the future, what might that look like if we get a request in? And, because these 2 particular streets have really risen to brought the issue to a forefront in terms of conversation. We did an initial review of both 32nd Street and Pleasant Acres, to see what might that look like, what are the kind of evaluations that we would be doing. And there's a larger and a more detailed, sort of summarized it here quickly. For 32nd Street, it's a little bit of a longer street. You've got almost a mile of roadway. Although it's narrow, it doesn't have any bike lanes. There's no parking on it. There's really wide parkways, There's no driveways, and so it creates this really open feel that naturally gives people this sense that they feel comfortable driving a little bit more quickly. The assessment that we did includes, thanks to city staff, Mark's staff, and Leon did a great job, of putting those road tubes out and getting a lot of data for us. 2,800 vehicles a day on 32nd Street. The average speed is 24 miles an hour. The 95th percentile, and what that means is that 95% of the vehicles on the road are going at or below 35 miles an hour. So almost everyone's going 34 miles an hour a lot. There's still quite a few, right, that are above the 25 mile an hour, but most everyone is below 34 miles an hour. We take a look at land use. We pull all the crash records. Mark's getting us information on school bus stops. If there's adjacent elementary schools and parks, and those all go into an evaluation where we can sort of identify if those are items that are not really of concern, if those are items that might be mitigated by some kind of traffic mitigation, or if there's a specific area of concern. And what that assessment does is then lets us start prioritizing locations if and when you start getting a lot of requests that come in if you're running a program. For this particular roadway, we feel like it's probably a pretty good candidate for level 2 mitigation, meaning that we might recommend that a series of, for instance, speed humps would go in. We say it's a good candidate, because it would be dependent on, having a program, allocating some funding, and then having the neighborhood, reach some kind of a consensus that this is really what they want to do. If that isn't something that the neighborhood can reach a consensus on, then again, we could choose different mitigation measures that wouldn't require consensus. When we look at Pleasant Acres Drive, that's a much shorter roadway. You can see that, although the actual street width is very similar to 32nd, because it has a ton of driveways, there's parking on both sides, and it has a much tighter feel to it. And especially in the evening when you have a lot of cars that are parked there, the cars that are going through almost have to sort of pick and choose their route through there. And so it functions a little bit more differently. Look at the average vehicles per day. It's less than 300, so it's about 1/10 of the volume of 32nd. Average speed of 21, the 95th percentile, again, almost everybody's going less than 28 miles an hour. In this case, because it's a much smaller neighborhood, we would recommend that as a starting point, that we start with some of that level 1 mitigation. Let's do an outreach program, an educational program, because it's a audience that's using that. And, let's take a look at this signal timing at 11th and 32nd, because part of what we're hearing from the residents is that people are using this as a cut through to avoid the signal. So if we can improve the signal operations, then maybe that helps minimize the cut through, and then with education of the residents, we might be able to address some of those issues. And so, that's just a really quick review of what this might look like, if we were evaluating these roadways, whether it's these or any others in the future. So last slide here is the potential next steps, would be questions, for you all, whether there's interest in developing a citywide mitigation program. We'd recommend that be open then, to the community to provide input, that you have some minimum criteria, to be a part of that process, that you have the ability to prioritize roadways if you get a lot of requests in, and then anytime you go with any kind of physical construction, that consensus building, because you just don't want to put humps in that 2 months later you're having to tear out because there's been this incredible neighborhood backlash on them. So, those 32nd and Pleasant Acres could certainly be a potential pilot project, if we were to move forward. So with that, Mayor, thank you.
If I can just conclude for staff. So in your packet, you will find a draft of a policy that really is, what you just heard is a summary of that draft policy that outlines goals for the program, the level 1 measures, level 2 measures, and the process for evaluating and proceeding with level 2 measures if those are desired or warranted. You'll also see just a couple of kind of flyers that can be used to promote traffic safety, first of all. That's kind of part of that education, and also a flyer that could help us promote this policy once it's adopted. So that concludes staff's presentation.
Let's test this out. Councilman Castle, can you do this again and see?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me? We can hear you.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this looks great. I especially like the ideas for the pilots for the level 2 measures on 32nd, level 1 on Pleasant Drive. I think this looks really good, and I think that would be a fantastic start for our community.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
So looking at this, I know that we talk about education and everything, which is important. I know the residents that have come to us have tried to do education. They've tried to get people to slow down. I think they've done everything that they can possibly do to get people to slow down and through the neighborhood, and it didn't work. So they can't. Wants to see if we can do something. While I was looking at some of these posted speeds, there seems like there is a great number of people that do actually exceed the speed limit and exceed it pretty high. I mean, I know we said that, 28 was the 95th percentile in Pleasant Acres, and 34 was the 95th percentile, but then we had some expected to exceed, we had quite a few people. So I know people, they try to do it, drivers are doing it. They're in a hurry, they don't care. They don't care if they're only concerned with themselves. They're not concerned about, other people. And I know here it says, don't let your kids play in the streets. But that's what kids do. Kids play in the street. Kids do that. People should feel safe in the neighborhood to let the kids enjoy being outside, playing in the street, playing games, all that stuff. I think we need to take more of the level 2 mitigations and put some of these in place to be in these neighborhoods. I don't think some of the stop signs or the level 1 mitigations are going to help in some of this area. I think we're going to need to start maybe slowing it down there for those residents in that area to feel safe and protected, just based on the numbers that I see in the packet. So I think we need to take a little bit more drastic for the stuff we're going to go into all of that. Peter?
Where to start? I agree with him. Thanks for your presentation. There's several issues that I have. First of all, this neighborhood traffic safety frequently asked questions and everything for the city of Evans. I don't know. I kind of find it really offensive. I really do find it offensive. Like, it just seems like it's neighbors or people are coming about speeding issues, and we're telling them, well, too bad you can't get a speed bump, too bad you can't have a stop sign, and maybe the speed limit is something that we can't do either. So I don't know. I think that we need to change our tone on how this is presented on our city website, if this is indeed how it's presented. Anyways, so as far as council member Clark's opinions, I do agree that we've had numerous residents in this area showing up here complaining about it. So I think that there's already consensus. They've already had a meeting. If you did a meeting, we have the same problems in my area. I mean, I have neighbors calling at 2 o'clock in the morning. It is not the local residents that are sitting there speeding through. It's the people that are cutting through. And these people aren't cutting through to avoid the 32nd Street light. They're cutting through to avoid the 35th Avenue and the 47th Avenue lights, because that is congested, especially in the afternoons when you have people picking up their kids. So a lot of the racing also occurs in the middle of the night. I know that. It's in my neighborhood. If you were to have a neighborhood meeting in my neighborhood, which I don't think a lot of people even want to come over to my side of town sometimes, you'll get a little bit of an eye-opening experience, because it is, again, not them that's doing it. It's the people that are being reckless. It's not somebody's teenager that you could just sit them down and talk to. I do want to say that that I think that we should go to level 2 on there. We need to have signs, yard signs. People that are concerned should have free yard signs. I think we need to have a portable display. I also think that 35 miles an hour going down that road is really fast. I think that in most residential areas it's 30. Some of them it's 25. So I think we need to figure out in the entire city what is best, because I know in my neighborhood there's a 30 mile an hour speed limit sign on one road, and then just down the road is 25, and the neighbors are already confused. Is it 25 or 30 in neighborhoods? So I think we need to, and that's probably a really good start on where we need to go from there. And I like the table ideas. I don't know if you ever have gone on the street behind the King Supers on 11th, where the Ace Hardware is. There's those tables there. You do not want to go fast on them.
No.
And it certainly has slowed down the neighborhood. So I like those a lot. Thank you.
I just to clarify one thing, the engineering team has been contracted to develop the level 2 option solutions for these 2 locations. So that's in the works for you coming up at a subsequent meeting. We wanted to bring this policy tonight that we can work with all the neighborhoods on, that we are recommending would include some of level 1, and then where appropriate, the level 2s. But we've heard from you, and we've heard from citizens certainly on 32nd Street, that we need more there. So that those will be coming to you independent of this policy tonight.
I just have one more thing to say, and something that does not cost the city is just having more traffic enforcement. I've said it before. I mean, I grew up in Greeley. I frequented Eaton. I'm going to tell you that you do not speed through Eaton. You do not speed through Windsor, through LaSalle, Windsor. So I think that we need to give more traffic enforcement, so people don't think that they can speed through the town of Evans. Thank you.
Well, I certainly noticed a lot more people running stop signs. I noticed here 2 weeks ago, someone ran the stop sign on the bus on 17th, and that seems to be a recurring problem, I think, with the same person doing that every morning as they're traveling to work. And definitely have a bunch of cars speeding up and down the road, different hours of the day and night. I've seen a lot of common techniques that they use in Fort Collins specifically. There are other cities that use some of the same techniques, and those are the speed bumps and the traffic circles, and it definitely works. Long Run uses a lot of that too. So I guess it's time for others to take a look at some of it, because some of this is getting out of hand in the neighborhoods. And I agree with Councilmember Spear that we probably need to, if there's any way to step up the traffic enforcement, we need to do it.
Councilwoman Johnson?
I do like the fact that we're going towards the level 2 on these 2, but I do like that we're going also towards some kind of policy for the entire city of Evans. I do feel like 32nd, it's a long stretch. And so when we have long stretches throughout the city, people feel as though, hey, let's race. And I see it constantly day and night all the time. And that is a safety issue for me, just because, people that are racing don't think about anyone else but themselves. And then you have an accident and other people, unfortunately, are at a loss. So that's concerning, especially because I want to ensure that our residents are safe. I do feel as though, stop signs in that area, those bumps, I know stop signs are a little more because they're, as far as cost effective, but those, what do you call them? The tables, not the humps. Yes, those are definitely, I think, a great way to deter. I do understand that you mentioned sometimes it doesn't deter people as much as it should, but just based off specific areas, even like, I think I'm not sure that road that's next to Clover, but there's a road that has them, and people tend to kind of slow down, and they know. But also enforcement's a big one. Just being, so people understand and know that, hey, if you're speeding, we're going to definitely, ticket you. I want to be one of those cities that also know that you just don't speed. And I don't think Evans is there, and I do understand that we right now are short-staffed in the police department, and, that is something that we're trying to definitely, resolve in the sense of getting more police officers. But eventually when we get there, hopefully we can, be more on top of that. But I'm just glad that the policy is coming, because there's a lot of areas within the city of Evans that we have straightaways and long stretches with no stop sign or anything to deter people from just speeding. And not only that, it's like these cut through areas. It's not the main arterials. It's like specific areas that they cut through to avoid those arterials. And so I see it all, like even 32nd by Sam's Club, like where the apartments are. There's like a long stretch there, and then they turn. There's no stop signs, and that turn goes into like a one lane. And I just see people. I'm like, oh my gosh, that car is gonna fly into that house. And I just always look at it, and it always concerns me, because then we think, what are we doing as a city? Are protected, or even residents in homes, and residents already came and showed us, like they're running, hitting stop signs, they're getting into properties, they're on the grass areas, and so I do see, as Councilmember Spear mentioned, they kind of already have a consensus in a sense. So just providing them those tools to continue to pursue that overall consensus to get those areas taken care of. So. Long-winded.
I wrote down, I think we need level 2 for the whole city.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, the thing is, I live in a neighborhood, and we only have 2 entrance exits to my neighborhood. And right next to my house is Clover Circle. And they used to have like an oil well thingamajigger in the middle. And there's one on the west end of the property too now. Thank the Lord. And I'll tell you why. They love to drift on that circle in the winter. It just, and I sit there and I'm like, they're going to hit my fence, and I'm going to have to pay for this, and I'm not going to be a happy camper. And then they also, it's a one-way circle. I knew it was you. No. They also have a one-way circle. Everybody goes the other way because they don't want to go around the whole circle, even though they could cut down an alleyway. And then we also have 4 main roads to it, but then you also have 4 alleys to it. And I'm telling you, and yeah, sometimes you come around that alley and you're going to turn in your alley and someone's coming out. Well, if they have a fence, you can't see them. So you're just like, where you go? And yes, I've not speeding, but I have done that. And it's everywhere. It's like Mayor Pro Tem Clark said. They're all going to do what they want to do, when they want to do, how they do it. I manage a property. We have a posted 10-mile-an-hour speed limit. No parking on our private drive, speed bumps, and they drive through there like it's 50 miles an hour. They got to get somewhere because they're on fire. So, yeah, they're going to do it no matter what, no matter where. I say all of it, and even maybe build it into future developments that we have, especially if they're going to have roads that cut through. I think that's something that we'll need to have eventually, sorry, Ann, built into the codes for that new development, because obviously people just don't care anymore. Thank you.
Yeah. I like what you guys did here. I like having it tiered. You meet the criteria, you get the 1. You meet the next criteria, you're at 2. I like the mitigation aspects of it. I am glad to hear we're doing number 2 on these 2 things here. I do respect very much what you said. Enforcement can be a huge part of this. Can you go back to your third, I believe it was your third slide there. This is a question for you guys in Chief Rank. I don't see it here anymore.
Oh, there it goes.
That one right there, yeah.
Okay.
So, I was at the zoo down in Denver 2 weeks ago. May or may not have had this happen to me. The bottom left one there that just tells you how fast you're going on it actually had cameras on it, a flash, and it took your picture and gave you a ticket.
Ooh.
So while we can't maybe right now get the police officers and that kind of stuff hired, maybe something, I'm sure they're expensive. I'm positive about it. But that's a way for enforcement, and it's also mobile. If you have this happening on 32nd Street, and you throw that out there for a week or 2, and people start getting tickets, they're going to start slowing down on that street, and then 2 weeks later, we move it over to Pleasant Acre Drive, and it's mobile. So I don't know if that's an option for us, or if you guys have any information on that. But I'll admit, I got right in my face driving past one of those right outside the zoo. I know there's a ticket coming. I promise you I'll not be speeding the next time I go to the zoo right outside. So I don't know if you have any information on anything like that, or if that's something we'll use.
Do you have an answer generally about that?
Yeah, Jenna, we can bring back some more information about that. There's some legal talk about, but it's absolutely doable.
Yeah.
We can bring back some more
I think that
information.
answers a little bit of our enforcement part, where everybody's struggling to find police officers. That's what I really want, the next best thing, like something like that.
I like where you're
And it
going.
moves, so you can put it in all different areas of the city.
You've seen the traffic cameras that take the picture.
Yeah.
If you run a light, you get a ticket.
I've got one of those
And
too.
then in Fort Collins, they have nobody that parks in various locations and sits there for, if you drive behind the west side of CSU campus, I'll guarantee you nobody's doing over 35. Because of the fact that that cameras are periodically.
It looked exactly like that with a little camera. You can see it flash.
Actually, I think those smaller ones, they have that capability too. If I remember hearing that somewhere.
Part of it, but a lot of people, myself, I just thought that was something telling me I was speeding. I didn't know.
But see, it's kind of like the whole, like when you're on 85, like going towards LaSalle, like everyone knows do not drive fast because they'll get you. And so that will do the same thing. It just stops, it slows people down. So that's the whole, traffic calming.
So if you can bring us a little more on that.
Yeah, we will. We'll
You need to go
coordinate
through it
with
lunchtime.
the police services and.
At 11 o'clock, they won't get you. There's no police protection at all.
One thing I want to bring up about 32nd Street, especially from 11th Avenue to 17th. That road's wide. People don't know if it's 2 lanes in each direction or what. And what's really annoying is you're driving down the road and somebody's like just coming up right. So it's like, this is not a 2-lane road. It's a 1-lane road. Or they go where that little dip is right there by the storage, and they go all the way around the dip while somebody's going straight. And then as soon as they go over the dip, oh, I'm going to speed up real quick. And then they try to cut in front of you, and it's just like, it's not how you go around a dip, first of all. Second of all, now you're going to cause an accident. So I think we need to do some type of mitigation of that area as well to define it. What is that road? Is it 2 lanes each direction? Is it 1 lane? Because
That's a weird configuration.
treat it as everything. I mean, you got one person that's driving, close to the center line. You got somebody who's driving all the way over here. You got somebody driving in the middle, and they're all like all over the place. It's like your car staggered, all going. It's like, which one is it?
That one can be done with like striping and protected bike lanes, where they have actual bollards that they put on the side of the road to define a bike lane. And like Martina said earlier, when the road feels narrower, you're going to slow down. So people are on the curve on 32nd Street going east when you get into the trees. Generally, you slow down because it's a curve, but the trees make it feel narrow.
So once you get past 32nd, past 17th, the road is quite much narrower. I mean, that little thing is right next to my house. My house is just to the right of that one right there. So I see it all the time. But yeah, it's much wider down there, and it's much narrower going east-west once you get past 17. So I think if we define east-west past 17, that might help it as well. Because it's really bad. I mean, it's terrible.
And we drive around and in the morning, Pete is out here in front of the school every morning with his radar, and I know he gets at least 2 or 3 every morning, but that's one location. And so we try to control it on the schools, especially during pick up and drop off times. But those are the locations where we definitely want to.
And it's kind of like, council members here mentioned, we get throughout the year always, concerned citizens coming to us about speed. So that is a huge issue because it's a constant.
Right.
So, had it not been a constant, then it would be like, okay, let's look into other avenues. But because it is, and that's a huge concern, we want to ensure that we're doing the best we can to mitigate that.
I mean, one of the benefits about having a comprehensive program, is that when you have citizens that are concerned, that there's a place for them to call. There's a coordinator that oversees it. There's a program that they can fit into, and so it's not something where they have to come to council as a one-off, saying, "Well, I'm concerned about this, and I'm concerned about this, and here I'm concerned about this one." And it's there's an existing program that has a process and criteria and evaluation that goes with it. Hopefully, to lessen, the amount of sort of individual requests that you might get here, because then you have a comprehensive program that sort of looks at it. And again, the answer might be different for different streets. I mean, just like, you were saying, Mayor Pro Tem Clark, about some of it might be striping, some of it might be what we call a road diet. We're sort of narrowing up a road to try to make it feel a little bit narrower. And sometimes we can do that with vertical elements or striping. And so, it can all fit within that program, depending on what the situation is.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate your time. We've been interrupting you. We can move on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the multi-modal transportation master plan. Sir, if you want to come on up and join us for this one as well. Thank you again, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Council. This is a joint session with our Planning Commission and our Master Plan Steering Committee. As you know, we've been working through the various chapters of the Master Plan. The transportation, the multimodal transportation plan is a chapter within the Master Plan, but it also stands alone due to its significance and importance in the community, which outlines priorities and plans and things like that. For that reason, we thought that it was worth having this joint session. I'm going to turn it over briefly to Community Development Director Ann Johnson, who can introduce our guests at the table, and then can perhaps lead the overview. And then at the end, we hope to have a little time for questions and conversation, discussion.
Thanks, Jim. So on the Master Plan Steering Committee, there are two members here this evening, Councilwoman Mortensen and Mayor Rudy. David Woolman is part of our Planning Commission as well. So tonight we have Christian Morieko with us, and he is with Fair and Piers. He has been our project manager for this activity in the city of Evans. And Christian is going to go over kind of the current state analysis. Where are we today with traffic and with transportation, mass transit, and trails in the city of Evans? What are some of the steps that we're going to take to move forward? And then to start discussing some benchmarks and other action items. So that is what Christian will be talking with us about tonight. So with that, I will turn it on over to Christian.
Thank you, and thank you, Jim. Thank you for having me this evening. Appreciate the opportunity to present the work we've done thus far on the multimodal transportation plan to Council and to Mayor Rudy. So, we appreciate your support of this effort, and I'm not sure if I can move slides here. Okay, is that you or me?
I don't know.
Okay.
We'll find out next
So we have quite a bit to cover this evening, and I understand we have a short time on the agenda, so I'll try and move as quickly as possible and save 10 to 15 minutes for your questions. I want to provide a brief overview of why Evans is undergoing the update to the master plan for transportation, provide a summary of where we've been with public outreach efforts, so how we've conducted community engagement, the number of community members we've heard from, and what we've heard so far. We have a set of proposed infrastructure improvements, transportation improvements that would be intended to both address community member feedback and meet the future travel demand that we've modeled for 2045, which is the horizon year of this effort. We'll go through our modeling results. So we've used the regional travel demand model to look at a few different scenarios for how traffic might be handled as the community grows. And we've modeled a few of the different more significant investments for capital infrastructure that may be proposed in the plan to see how they would influence traffic patterns. We've developed a project prioritization methodology. So for the draft list of projects that you'll see this evening, there's a score assigned to each one that's based on a few different inputs. We've developed performance measures that the community is going to be able to use to track plan implementation and to assess where, how is transportation and mobility functioning in Evans relative to today's conditions. So we've developed some benchmarks and then some targets for both interim years and for 2045. And then we'd like to end with a few questions for you, just to understand your vision for the mobility plan, and also to have an opportunity for us to answer your questions. I think it might be me. Okay. So the Evans has not updated its transportation plan since 2004. Communities choose different cycles to update these types of documents. Typically, you'll see a 5 to 10 year cycle, so 2004 is a little bit of an outlier in terms of age of the plan. The community's changed since then, and certainly with development in the North Front Range and with Weld County and the local population growth that you're witnessing here, that there's certainly been a need identified by staff to update the plan. We also want to ensure that Evans is aligning with regional transportation goals. So the North Front Range Metropolitan Planning Organization adopted its 2045 regional plan last year or the year before. It outlines a number of goals and also outlines a number of regionally significant corridors that touch Evans. So we want to make sure that Evans is aligning with that effort. And as Evans grows and adds population and potentially more of an employment base, the expectation is that travel demand will grow. So transportation plan helps accommodate that. And then lastly, as you know, the community's been updating its comprehensive plan, and this has been a really unique opportunity to work alongside that team as the future land uses are determined for that where development may occur is going to be served by adequate transportation infrastructure. So the growth that we have forecasted for the community between now and the plan horizon year is roughly doubling both the number of households and then seeing an increase of almost 100% in employment. The figures are based on a few different things. One is the trend in household growth that Evans has seen over the last decade or so. And then the employment is based on if all of the land uses that are zoned to support commercial, industrial, and any other type of land use that could support jobs or people working were fully built out. That's around 10,000 jobs is what the community might attract. These numbers are certainly not a crystal ball, and if anything are intended to be a little bit conservative so that if we're estimating growth at a slightly higher rate than it's been occurring, we can make sure that we're planning to accommodate that growth. Every recommendation in the plan that involves a significant capital investment would need further study. This is just sort of a preliminary step towards documenting that Evans has assessed its transportation needs for the future and is prepared to consider the different assets that might have to be invested in. But certainly some of this growth, it may not happen at the exact rate that we're forecasting, in which case the need for some of the projects recommended in the plan can be evaluated on an as-needed basis as you move forward through implementation. To share a little bit about our community understanding as we moved into this planning process, we assessed a few different metrics, and the final transportation plan is going to give a very full picture of mobility in Evans today. I'm just going to share a few takeaways this evening. One item that really stuck out to us is that relative to other neighboring communities, Evans has a higher share of residents who commute out into other communities for employment, and a relatively low share of individuals who live and work in Evans. So to us, what that says is that relative to some of your neighbors, there is more of a need amongst residents to make longer trips, to travel out of the community, to access services, and to work. So to put those numbers that you just saw into a little bit of context, when comparing to communities like Greeley or Johnstown or Windsor, Berthoud, as you can see, there's the lowest share of all those of residents who live and work in their community is Evans, and then the highest share of folks who commute out to jobs. Compared to Greeley, for example, where just over 20% of the population is making trips within the community for commute trips, that is not the case in Evans. So that signals to us the need to think regionally and to make sure that Evans is well integrated into a regional transportation system. When assessing how residents currently travel, The commute breakdown for transportation mode share shows that 80% of residents drive alone to work. So that to us says that there's a significant need to maintain robust roadway infrastructure that, as we heard during community outreach, people do rely on their vehicles and also rely on having relatively uncongested streets and having a reliable driving experience. We also want to make sure that we're considering options to potentially offer different transportation mode choices within Evans. So currently, about 2% of residents take transit or ride their bikes. So that's a relatively low share. In comparable communities, you might see a slightly higher share of folks riding transit, and 2% are walking for commute trips. This, just a caveat to this data, for things like accessing schools, shopping trips, things like that, we don't have this level of information. So this is just restricted to commute trips, but the 80% number is certainly, for folks who are driving alone, is certainly something that is important to us and we want to consider. We've done quite a bit of community outreach, and we've used a few different tools to learn from community members what their personal priorities are for transportation. We started the effort with a survey last summer, and actually Anne and her team at the Community Development Department were able to circulate that survey of the plan, so it was really useful to be able to start that effort as a consultant with that information in hand. We received 104 responses from community members, and the survey had asked about existing transportation challenges, preferences, and priorities. Apologies. Two questions that really jumped out at us, the responses to the two questions. One, which travel modes are most challenging in Evans? When we asked folks to rank those, nearly 50% of respondents indicated that bicycling around the community is challenging, and 43% indicated that walking is challenging, compared to 15% for driving. So that when we're kind of comparing that against the information we know about how people travel, that sort of inverse of the share of folks who are driving to the share of people who find that a relatively easy travel mode, that makes sense. Also makes sense that a really low share of people walking and biking, high share of respondents who found that challenging. And when asked what the top priorities are for the transportation plan or personal priorities for transportation and mobility, the top four things that emerged were a balance, residents seeking a balance of all transportation modes, improved traffic flows, so addressing congestion issues as they occur, building and improving sidewalks, and then also addressing safety issues. There's also an online engagement component that we pursued. This was especially last winter in light of COVID-19 and a lot of restrictions that were causing these types of outreach efforts to be shifted into digital formats. We worked closely with the master plan consultant team to leverage a project website that they had developed. So we gathered input through that project website, which had a mapping activity on it where folks could indicate areas where they had transportation challenges or had ideas for transportation improvement opportunities. We conducted a series of 3 virtual community workshops over Zoom with open invitations to all community members to attend, and we got some good feedback that way. The project website, as I mentioned, was a resource that we looked to throughout the process to share information with community members and to gather input. And then as weather warmed up, we were able to have a in-person event in City Park in East Evans on May 27th. We had over 70 households participating. I know that some members of the council were present, so thank you for attending. We appreciated that. And in general, we got a lot of great input from community members. We showed a map of potential project opportunities to collect input. We asked people to vote on their transportation priorities, so this is the result of that voting exercise. We asked for community member input on different infrastructure types that might be pursued through the transportation plan to get their feedback on what they would like to see out on the streets in Evans. When asked about priorities, community members identified new trails and bike lanes as the #1 priority, and improved roadway crossings as the second highest priority. Specifically, community members indicated issues crossing US 85 between East and West Evans, so that is an issue that's come up routinely throughout the outreach process. Also, several community members have voiced concerns about specific intersections, which we have documented and proposed some potential intersection enhancements that would include enhanced pedestrian crossings throughout the community, which we feel would alleviate those concerns. In addition, new roadway connections is the third highest priority, and that's something that has been pursued through the previous plan, the 2004 plan. There are a number of potential roadway connections that have not yet been implemented, so we've evaluated those, have decided to carry forward with evaluation, carry forward those projects to maintain those in the transportation plan. We've also identified a few new roadway connections that might be beneficial as development occurs. Specifically, when we talk to community members about bicycling and walking improvements, that's a topic that we found a lot of community members were excited to interface with us about. When thinking through specific infrastructure types, off-street trails were considered by far and away the most popular type of bicycle infrastructure. So that's an amenity that community members really like. They anecdotally just mentioned when they visit other communities, really enjoy like riding the Prairie River Trail, for example. And there's a general desire expressed during outreach events to see more of those types of assets in Evans. And then also adding bicycle parking is another community priority that emerged both during the community event and in other conversations with community members. So that to us is a kind of simple, low-cost solution to enabling people to make more trips around the community by bicycle. In terms of walking improvements, Evans does currently have a really well-connected sidewalk grid, which is great. What we heard from community members that might promote more walking activity would be adding more pedestrian scale lighting in certain neighborhoods to make nighttime walking trips more comfortable, and in the summertime having more shade throughout the sidewalk network through tree plantings, and there's potentially other opportunities to add shade, which would incentivize more walking trips. And then to briefly sum up the May 27th event, when asked about specific project types that could be pursued through the transportation plan, some of the items that jumped out as most favorable to community members were the capacity enhancements that are planned for 37th Street. There was a desire we had relatively low representation of transit riders at the event, but there were a number of folks who spoke to members of the project team and indicated that if there was additional transit on 37th Street, where there's a fairly high density of Evans households, there would potentially be more of an opportunity to use it. In terms of roadway widening projects, there is support for a widening on 49th Street, and also one project that we've discussed with both staff and community members that emerged from the 2004 plan was a connection of 35th Avenue to the south. Back in 2004, that was considered a more long-term visionary project. As we get into the future, and now that we're in 2021 and we think through that opportunity a little bit more, it's being revisited, and so we've asked community members about it, and there is support for having that additional connection across the river. And in terms of trail infrastructure, a connection through Riverside Park and then heading west towards the Big Thompson and South Platte Rivers is also a popular idea amongst community members and is in line with the North Front Range MPO's regional active transportation plan. We also held a similar event on August 4th at the Riverside Library that was specifically engaging members of the Spanish-speaking community. So we had interpreters who attended the event who helped us connect with those community members more who had not been as represented at the May 27th event. In many regards, we got similar input from those residents, a lot of support for the 35th Avenue extension idea, and a lot of support for increasing multimodal transportation opportunities on 37th Street. So as that widening project occurs and the wide sidewalks get added per city code in the cross section that Evans has adopted, a lot of people were keen on seeing that amenity, so to make that area more walkable. And then when asked about transportation priorities, again, trails and bike lanes was the #1 priority amongst community members who attended that event. So I have with me a packet. This was not included in the council packets, but a set of the transportation projects that would potentially be recommended in the plan. I can either walk through it or pass it out, and you can review at your leisure. I don't know what the...
Are you going to be talking through each one of these?
I'm not going to, unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go through. I'm going to give a quick overview of, we've divided it by transportation mode.
Why don't we pass, if you can start speaking, I will pass it on. And can split.
Okay. Thank you. We started, we'll start with the roadway infrastructure projects. So these are divided into intersection operation improvements, which are largely centered on opportunities to improve safety conditions. Roadway widenings, which are largely moving forward from the 2004 plan, but also some have been added based on assessed need based on future travel demand. Paving and repaving, which is being done by Evans currently through the paving and roadway maintenance program. And then certain more minor improvements like speed mitigation, which relate back to the neighborhood traffic calming program that you just heard about. And then, of course, the new roadway connections to serve development. So the first page of your packet has the map of the potential roadway improvements. The following pages have a table that shows a little bit more information about each project. The code on the left column corresponds with the labels on the first sheet of paper. So you can reference as you go through, and if there's any particular project that jumps out to you, there should be more information provided within the table. And of course, if you have any questions as you're reviewing, you can let me know. You'll note that in the right-hand column, there's a prioritization score. That's something that I briefly mentioned, that we've been assessing each project based on a few different inputs that were developed with guidance from both staff and the project steering committee. And I'll be sharing a little bit more information about those inputs shortly. So this is the set of roadway projects. I think the things to note that we've heard the most about and that we've kind of assessed with the finest eye to detail would be the 35th Avenue project, which is number 25, Freedom Parkway out to 65th Avenue, which is a programmed project, and then some things that might be jumping out at you are the 77th Avenue and 65th Avenue projects, which are intended to serve development, which, according to the work that's been done on the future land use plan, may be occurring in Western Evans. So certainly if any questions arise, I'll be happy to answer specific questions at the end of the presentation. For active transportation projects, those are divided into paved multi-use trails, so those would be in the city. Something that's really emerged as a highlight would be the Evans Ditch Trail, so completing that resource and making it more of an east-west dedicated path for pedestrians and bicyclists through the community. In addition, leveraging the support that's happening regionally for the South Platte and Big Thompson River trails, which have been designated as regionally significant active transportation corridors by the North Front Range MPO. That's something that we heard from community members would be a beneficial transportation asset. Since there's currently a relatively low number of on-street bicycle lanes in Evans, and we did not hear a tremendous amount of support for adding additional bicycle lanes from community members, we've identified a few corridors, and I think 32nd Street is one that might jump out to you based on the conversation that we just had on neighborhood traffic calming as appropriate locations for potentially adding on-street bicycle lanes due to the amount of right-of-way that's available and the connectivity that those facilities would promote. But otherwise, we did focus on adding multimodal transportation facilities that are either wide sidewalks on arterials or shared use multi-use trails. As you go through the list, certainly feel free to flag any projects that jump out at you, and I'll be happy to take questions about those. We have identified projects that are located near, either adjacent or relatively close to schools in the community. Those projects are potentially safe routes to school projects, which could be funded through a federal grant, and they also can improve transportation safety for students and improve options for students being able to walk and bike and not necessarily being dropped off if students live sufficiently close by. So we have highlighted those projects as well. Quickly, we did assess opportunities for additional transit connections within Evans. As noted earlier, relatively low percentage of community members ride the bus. However, there's certain opportunities that we noticed. For example, a high share of Greeley Evans transit ridership is students. So there's potential opportunities to, District 6 is already coordinating with Greeley Evans Transit to make sure that service levels to schools are well aligned with start and end times and extracurricular activities, but there might be an opportunity for additional improvement there. In addition, we have heard from community members that the lack of frequency on the transit routes that serve Evans is an impediment to riding. So there's recommendations expanding, potentially exploring a partnership with Greeley Evans Transit to explore opportunities for expanded routes on within Evans, but also to increase the frequency of existing routes. So those are recommendations that are not prioritized in the list, as you'll see, since they would need a high level of coordination with Greeley Evans Transit, and also some local decisions about the level at which Evans contributes into the service. So in the short term, there's obviously some constraints on the transit agency side due to labor shortages that are pinching a lot of different industries. But as the community grows, there, especially along the 37th Street corridor, which is one that's been identified as having a high transit propensity, meaning a fair share of residents living close enough that they would ride the bus if it was there. There could be some near-term opportunities to explore. All right, so we modeled a few different future scenarios for traffic and traffic demand in Evans relative to the potential expansions or changes to the roadway network. The first one that I want to share with you is what we consider to be the lower investment option. So that would be pursuing and implementing the projects that are already in the design pipeline or have been identified as potentially being funded within the coming years. So the highlights here are the Freedom Parkway widening, so that's 37th Street out to 65th Avenue, and then also the 23rd Avenue widening. And what this map is showing you is the 2045 average daily traffic volumes on corridors throughout the city. This may be a little bit easier to identify, to read in your council packets, but generally what we're seeing is a high, obviously a high level of demand on US 85, but we did model the potential employment growth and household growth per the future land use map, which is going to potentially add residential development out in the western section and add commercial and industrial development south of the Platte River. That is going to cause quite a bit of demand for travel on 77th Avenue. So that's something that jumped out to us. When looking at the vehicle to capacity ratio, so that's the number of vehicles on a corridor relative to the amount of vehicles that it can accommodate at different times of day. When looking at the low investment scenario, are concerns about the north-south demand on 77th Avenue. Again, this is the low investment scenario, so without additional connectivity, as you can see, quite a bit of traffic demands added on this north-south corridor, and also across on Freedom Parkway. Midday, certainly a little bit less of a concern, but we were still surprised to see this level of demand over in this portion of the city. And in the PM, again, high levels of demand. As we look at the full investment scenario, which would be building out all of the roadway widenings and connections, the amount of travel demand remains the same because the future land uses are generating the same amount of traffic. But when looking at the vehicular capacity, as you can see, the blue lines highlight items that were added. 35th Avenue crossing of the river would carry quite a bit of that traffic. And then the widening on 77th Avenue would also accommodate quite a bit of traffic. However, south of here is still a bit of a pinch point. Midday, the travel conditions are a lot clearer, much lower levels of congestion. And in the PM, we generally see some operational improvements on 37th Street, though with a few concerns. What I'd highlight is that since the council packets have been submitted upon the guidance of the steering committee, we also took a look at paving 49th Street and connecting it through and widening it. And that would improve conditions, so that's something that we're potentially adding to the project list, and it's reflected in your in the map packet that you just received. Yep. Right. Take the last few minutes just to quickly share the inputs that we considered for the project prioritization. We looked at access to key destinations, so this was one of the most significantly weighted inputs. We looked at projects that are near bus stops, schools, any kind of civic services like libraries, for example, shopping centers, which includes restaurants and other commercial uses, parks and trail access points. Projects that are closer to more of those amenities received a relatively higher score. For safety, we also weighted the crash rate near projects as higher. So projects that were located in areas or on corridors where there's a relatively high amount of crashes received a higher prioritization score, with the thought that most of the projects in the plan address safety in some way, or safety conditions, and have carry an opportunity to lower the crash rate. In addition, we looked at pavement condition as well. For demand, we looked at both land use, so the population and employment, future population and employment density near the proposed projects, and then also the actual travel demand, so the volume to capacity ratios, and if there's corridors with higher volume to peak hour volume to capacity ratios, those projects received additional prioritization points. We looked at equity, which we considered the share of low-income households near projects. So the thought was to potentially prioritize projects that would open access to more of Evans' lower-income residents. The presence of a multi-use path or a wide sidewalk, so this is the multimodal connectivity opportunity, making sure that folks on a corridor have options whether to drive, walk, or bike. And then lastly, we assigned projects additional points based on the number of times that we'd heard about them through community outreach efforts and during the different community outreach meetings that we held. So specific things that jumped out to community members and received a lot of favor, we documented those in the process.
I could suggest, I know the council's going to see this all again.
Sure.
And I think the performance measures are in the packet, correct?
There's a sample of the performance measures, but we can share the full set.
I think we should. We can ask council to have a look at those. I want to save a few minutes for any questions.
Yes, absolutely.
Or things to highlight before we have to move on.
Sorry, planning commission, Commissioner, do you have any questions? Council, do you have any questions or comments?
I think this is a great presentation, first of all. I'd really like to listen to the community and all of their input in this. One of the big things I also like is we've identified several areas that we can do improvements on and take advantage of MPO funds. That was one of the big things that took away. There's an entire thing is everywhere you suggested is someplace where we can get funds. So I think that's fantastic. That way we can get money. I think it's a great job, and I look forward to maybe this here.
Yeah, my note was the exact same. It was a nice presentation, and the slideshow was great. I like that. I think that, on a side note, I think it's interesting that in several places you guys said that you guys found that the vehicle speed mitigation was an issue. Anyways, and I have several other suggestions regarding, in the future, I can, add some suggestions regarding the bike connectivity and bike paths. I think that needs to be a discussion.
Jim, if it's okay with you, if anybody does have stuff like that, can we just send this thing?
Yeah, I think for the sake of time, that's something that's in detail. So I think we can look into that. And then other things. And I do just want to say one thing with the Greeley Evans Transportation. They do report that this library here has the highest ridership that they have through their transit system. So that was just a few points that I wanted to make. Great presentation. I love that. Thank you.
I'm glad that this is finally getting updated after 15 years. Okay.
That's it? Oh my goodness. It's a great presentation. I think it's very informative. I do have a lot of questions about it. I like the fact that we're definitely planning ahead in the future. One of the things I saw the transit, I would like to know like a map of where our transit, how it looks within the city of Evans, just because I feel that's an expansion point, especially when we have 80% that are driving alone. But I hope we have another opportunity to be able to ask questions. I know we can send them, but it's just, I like to talk to people.
There's a 2-hour session planned.
Perfect.
For December. We'll give council that opportunity.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I apologize for that presentation.
Oh, no worries. It was great.
Okay.
Andy, got anything real fast?
No, I have nothing substantial to add or ask right now. Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. Next one on the agenda is the 2022 capital budget. We'll hear from staff and Jackie. If no other citizens come, I don't see any yet. We'll give an extra 5 minutes.
Okay. Thanks, Mayor. This is an annual work session that we have as part of our budget process. The council will be seeing the entire budget with an emphasis on operations at your next council meeting. And so tonight, though, we want to focus on our capital budget. This is an opportunity for council to preview, review each of our major capital funds and the projects in each capital project category. The priorities staff is recommending many of these projects will probably be familiar to, and that's I certainly hope that's the case. But you can have a look at the priorities and have some discussion, hopefully, on those. Let us know if you'd like us to adjust anything or include anything that you don't see in the packet. So, given our time, I'm going to ask Jackie to kind of give an overview of each of the categories of each of the funds, and then we will have some time to talk a little bit more about any of the detail on those different project areas.
Sounds good. Thank you. Good evening. I'll try to make it through this just as fast as that first slide.
Is
Really.
the packet current, or do we have handouts as we go?
We're going to really focus on the presentation itself. Some of the numbers will look slightly different than what's in front of you. So we even spent a large chunk of today reprioritizing, really looking at it. I really feel like capital is something that really is a moving target as well. Priorities are changing. design is continuing. We're getting better costs on what construction will look like and what that phasing means. So we'll do our best to finalize it over the next week, but we'll point out the changes as we move along as well. And then I don't have updated handouts, but I'm happy to send them for anyone that wants that detail and wants to look at them again. So we will talk in terms of parks projects, road projects, and then capital projects that affect our enterprise funds. And we'll kind of go through those sections. Here's my is on.
Can you help her?
Do you have the magic touch?
Sometimes it gets caught up.
I'm for none.
It's because I said this was going to be fast. Right? I know. That's what I get.
Okay.
Well,
let's talk a little bit about
I know a lot of it too.
About funds, and we might. I think you mentioned starting with parks.
Yeah.
And I know that's an area that I've heard a couple questions about from council members. So
Sure.
we might
Yeah, we can start
focus on that.
to talk about parks. So we have both the Park Impact Fund, that is the impact development fees that we receive from development coming in the city, that's set aside for park benefits for that future growth.
Slide.
Oh, but I think I updated it quite a bit, so
Okay.
I won't look in back because that will mess me up. Thank you, though, Tammy. Appreciate it. So in terms, thank you, April. It is working. Now I have access to it. Great. So in that Park Impact Fund, the priorities that we're looking at achieving this next year is designed for open space park there at Arrowhead on the property that we acquired last year. We'll also be doing design and construction on Tuscany Trails Park, and also starting design on Ashcroft Draw Trail.
That's a new name, by the way. You know, we've got. I think I can point out. Finance director may have coined a new term. Tuscany Trails Park is our Tract O open space.
Okay.
So. Tract O. Yeah.
Yeah. That's how our city engineer had it listed. So all I'm doing is really making his projects come to fruition here. So those are 3 priorities that we feel like are good uses of impact funds for this next year. Moving forward, if that's too small to look or to see from where you're sitting, you'll kind of notice a ladder approach where one year we're starting construction for the following, or design rather, for construction in the following year. So you'll see then construction for that Arrowhead Open Space Park would happen in that following 2023 year. We would start design on Hunter's Reserve North Park. That would ultimately be construction then in 24. You'll see phase 1 and phase 2 of the Ashcroft Draw Trail, both in 23 and 24. So those projects are kind of that next phase of what's going to happen for park impact. In 25 and 26, you'll also see North Point Park construction, South Tuscany Park design and construction, and then we hope to start design on the West Evans Gateway Park. And that's when we've talked about the last couple of years on when we could start design on that and when is appropriate for that.
As a note, just those park impact fees can be used for new parks, but not existing parks.
Thank you. Absolutely. And then the other fund that we've been looking at for park priorities is our Conservation Trust Fund. And this, we get about $200,000 each year from the Colorado Lottery, and we can use those for acquisition of new parks as well as maintenance, repairs of existing public space and recreation amenities as well. So we have design for the Evans Ditch Trail starting next year, an amount of equipment electrification, also new terms coming in. We have our Water Smart Landscaping Phase 2 here at the complex. So Phase 1 obviously looks great out front. You'll see in the future years then the following phases that our Conservation Trust Fund can help with those projects as well. We do not have grant money built in yet for those because we haven't been awarded them, but we're hopeful that we'll continue to get some grant assistance to help with those phasing of landscape improvements here at the complex.
We are exploring the grant opportunity for that equipment electrification. In fact, we won't do it without the grant opportunity is before us. We're still checking that out with a bulk of that funding probably going toward a electric vehicle, electric park and utility cart that we use for sports field maintenance. Take up the majority, at least half of that equipment electrification fund. And we will bring this back to council for your approval since it is a grant.
Great, thank you for that addition. And then each year we'll also have an annual playground repair component. So this is small pieces of equipment, replace one slide or replace a swing, whatever might need to be done to just keep the playgrounds in good working order, and definitely not the full facelift of the playgrounds. In the years after, even smaller size than the last, I apologize, you'll see those other phases, 3 and 4 of the water smart landscaping here at the complex. And then you'll also see the Phase 2 of Evans Ditch Trail construction. And then in 2026 is when the Conservation Trust Fund starts to build back money again after completion of these other various trails and projects. And the first park that is slated for playground, sorry, why do I keep doing that too? I need to update that too, is Prairie View Park. And so that playground replacement is the first on the priority list to be improved and redone. So 2026 is that first year that that Conservation Trust Fund starts to build back some money to start those playground replacements. I think those are the notes I had on parks or playgrounds. Anything else on these before we move on to roads? Perfect.
Oh, wait, you want a question now?
Sure.
Parks and then.
Yeah.
That would be good.
Parks, you bet. Brian Stone, when he was here, he had us approved, we already approved a Arrowhead open space park design. So now we're going to spend $80,000 on another park design. That wasn't good, or what's that?
I don't believe we ever did a design on the park. We did
They had a parking lot, they had a structure, they had
There was some conceptual stuff that's done to make sure it would work around the water quality pond. So when we placed the water quality pond in its location that all the storm sewer goes through, there was room on the south side to build a parking lot and a structure. So it was just conceptual.
And Mark, that was used, actually, we did that, and it looked like a design to me, and you probably, so that we've been able to use that with GoCo, for instance. We've been applying, and Brian started the process of applying for funding to improve that open space with GoCo. So that's the design that you're probably thinking of is the conceptual one that we've been using with them. That hasn't been funded, and Bess Johnson has continued working with GoCo over several funding rounds now to get a GoCo grant for that project for various reasons that has not been funded. So we think it is time to move forward with getting that open space improved, and that's what this funding would do.
Parks. I got one for parks, so I approached Jim. A lot of our parks, not all, but most are in pretty bad shape. I mean, you really don't, like my
Playgrounds or parks or playgrounds?
Playgrounds.
Okay.
So we can only go to playgrounds.
Thanks.
Parks.
Well, I heard you say parks, which could be your point.
Playgrounds,
yeah.
They're in the parks.
Yeah.
So do you want to do that now, or do you want
Nope, you're fine.
Okay. The playgrounds in the parks is where I'm referring to. They're in really bad shape. And as we can see by the numbers she's throwing up here, we're not going to have any money in our Conservation Trust Fund. That's the only way for us to repair our parks. We can't use impact fees because the parks are already built. We don't have any money to do that with. And I think parks are one of the most important things, and playgrounds in particular in a park for our kids are very important for our neighborhoods. I think this council, I'm asking you, I think we need to look for a way to take some money, find some money, whether it's in our general fund where we do have of money right now, and we need to fix those playgrounds for our kids. My kids live in Grapevine, and I don't need to take my kids to the park. Wood chips on the ground, I want some of the surface, they fall, they're going to be okay. It doesn't have a swing, it doesn't have anything. I think we really need to update our parks. And I don't know, the thing I saw, where's you doing that today?
We have if you like it,
I don't want to eat the whole time up here at playgrounds, but I want to throw it in this council's view that I think we really should make an investment. One of the things I've learned on this master plan committee that Tammy has, a lot of these developers that we're wanting to come in and build these new houses have said to us and said to our staff, we're not really looking to build in there until we see you commit to fixing what you have now.
Exactly.
And I think fixing our playground and cleaning up our parks is a great thing. That's showing our community.
I do agree with that, because when my kids are, they signed up for soccer, you go to different like parks, and after they're done, with soccer, they just head to the playgrounds. And I was able to notice there was a lot of the playgrounds, a lot of the equipment was in good shape, or even like I'm not sure what park, it has like a blue kind of plastic turf where the kids play basketball. I mean, that thing is undulated. I mean, I don't even know how these kids can even run across that thing. And so that was a huge concern for me, just seeing that. And considering that, the recreation center, Evans Rec utilizes all those parks, and the kids after that go and play, we definitely need to do that. And it's not only that, it's, we live in Evans, so with young kids, we, walk or drive or just go and explore the different parks. They're like, oh, my son, let's go to the park with the big, slide. I'm like, okay, let's head over there. But I mean, just in general, for the safety of our community, is just ensuring that, parks, the playgrounds are safe.
So one thing I will mention on that, and I know we talked about it a little bit, if we could find some money, additional money in the general fund, and not saying we have to do all of them all at once, but say we can knock 2, 3, 4 out of them here, take some money, whether it's $1 million, $1.5 million, whatever, and maybe pay some outside consultant that does nothing but parts and stuff, and maybe get a few knocked out in a year or so versus spreading them out over time. I think that would be the way to go, if we can find the money to do that.
Do we have like a timeline of how each park within the city, like when they were updated?
That's what I was just going to ask.
Okay,
I'm
and
going to
then,
go over
yeah.
a little time on here, because this whole topic wasn't just about the playgrounds and parks, but we need to spend a little time on it. So I'm going to allow this to go on a little bit longer, if that's cool. If you want to go over the sheet.
Just a couple minutes, just an overview of the sheet.
Yep.
So Randy, would you like to give?
Sure. What you're looking at here in this blue sheet, the top part that says City of Evans Playground Inventory are the 10 existing parks with playgrounds and skate park. So there are 11 parks with playgrounds listed, plus the skate park. As you see, about 3/4 of the way over in the columns, there's a priority indication there. Now it's indicated 1 through 6. 6 just indicates that staff puts a lower priority on those parks because they are either basically brand new, like Riverside Park, or very recently updated, like City Park. 2 of them are underway or done this year. We did Driftwood Park earlier this year, and Denver Street is underway, funded through your last budget revision. Village Park would be the last one that's in I'll call it the future projects. 6 because what you have before you is a 5-year plan, and so we're putting those out in future years. So getting down to the nitty-gritty, what we would propose to you as a priority list, the parks that need attention first are the next 5. Prairie View Park, we'd suggest as a regional park, a community park, needs some attention. It was done a while back in 2002. Does need to be upgraded in terms of the safety surface, and a number of those features need to be replaced. Our second priority, and again, this is subject to your direction, but as far as condition itself, Vineyard Park, as the mayor mentioned, was built when Grapevine Hollow was new, back about 2005. It was, at the time, I understand from staff, intended to be an innovative park with different climbing features and things like that, but in the words of some 4 and 5 years old, it's a little lame. It's not getting a lot of use, and really could use some upgrading. Third priority would be Pioneer Park. That's probably one you also noticed because of the big playing field there.
Yeah.
It needs some attention. It was most of it was there between 2002 and 2005. Was somewhat upgraded in 2007, but is in need. Again, the safety surface and replacement of the material there. Ridge Park, we place in 4th place. It's actually built about the same time as the others in 2002 to 2003. Not in great shape, but we hesitate if we're doing these in order to do both Ridge and Prairie View back to back because they're basically three blocks apart, with Prairie View being the biggest draw. But Ridge does need attention too. And then the 5th priority would be Renaissance Park. It is relatively newer in 2012. It is seen as, and in all the Greeley and Evans Park surveys, comes across as Evans' sort of crown jewel. It's even being used by a lot of Greeley residents who take their kids there. It's ADA accessible, et cetera. So, but we need to continue and stay on top of our game. So those would be the, I'll call them the top 5 priorities, with all of them listed. At the bottom of the sheet and on the other side, there are actually 9 future or to-be-built parks. The good news is that 4 of those 9 are being built by the Metro District that's coming in with Peakview. They're coming in with 3 neighborhood parks and 1 regional park. So that is their responsibility to build and maintain those parks. So keep that in mind for the west side of Evans. Hunter's Reserve, it says south, it actually should be Hunter's Reserve North because it's 29th Street just south of 37th Street. There's a piece of city-owned land there that could be converted to a park. And these projects that we just talked about are eligible for park impact funding because they're brand new. So this latter group here could be park impact funded. North Point, similar. There's a fairly large tract of land around the non-pot irrigation pond there, and could hold a playground.
And I'll just note on any potential new parks, there's a strong caution and eye toward maintenance and our ability to maintain them. So
exactly.
That will have to happen at the same time we build new parks.
Right. So. All of the parks plans, and I think your discussions have indicated the desire for we'll call it West Evans Gateway Park. How the Peakview parks play into that, how any potential land swap with the school district around Prairie Heights plays into that, kind of yet to be seen, but that's out there, seen as a priority. And of course, the last 2 listed here, we are proposing to fund over the next couple of years and get them completed. That's Arrowhead and Tuscany Trails, or Tracto. So that's what you have in front of you. Again, our effort looking at age and condition and putting some priorities on these.
So I'm hearing, if I can just synthesize this part, I'm seeing heads nod. There is some interest in bringing back as part of the actual CIP budget that we would. I'm hearing 3-4 parks, playgrounds replaced over the next couple of years.
That's what I'm for. Absolutely.
Heads nodding. Okay. We're on.
Good direction, thank you.
5 minutes.
Sounds good. Moving on to road projects.
10?
Okay. There's a lot. It looks like there's a lot here, but the main 3 priorities for road projects next year are 37th Street, 23rd Avenue, and Idaho Street. So those are really, I just simplified, I think, $9 million of work for you in one sentence there.
That's all.
These items obviously are underway. There are lots of priorities for the city. So we do have the construction finishing up next year for phase 1, as well as the continued design for phases 2, 3, and 4 next year. In the future years, you'll see the construction costs for those projects. And we've utilized, as you can see in the blue box, CIP streets, our capital improvement funds for streets, funding quite a bit, our street impact funds for those westerly expansions of our roads. We also are utilizing our road tax fund and our food tax fund. And that's really important that we're using those food tax monies that are available to us currently for some of these road projects. Also next year's priorities, we have our ongoing street maintenance. We have a replacement to our traffic signal cabinets that are the electrical components that house our traffic signals. I had to be educated on what those cabinets really were. And then we also have sidewalks for the Evans Community Complex next year slated to be completed. So about $9 million of road projects that are next year's priorities.
And just a note on that, of that $9 million, about $2.6 million is being grant funded. We get $2 million of the $2.6 million for 23rd Avenue from the county. And then, of course, we have the Community Development Block Grant coming in for about $700,000 of that $1.1 million needed for Idaho Street. So without those funding sources, this list would be a little shorter.
I'm looking forward at future major road projects. In 2023, we've got $1.1 million of street maintenance that will be completed. We'll obviously have some of the phasing then of 37th Street, 2, 3, and 4 in 2024, 2025, and then future yet to be determined. So probably further out when our 2026 long-range plans are currently going. But you can see those amounts: $10 million, $7 million, $16 million of capital road improvements being slated. So very, very large undertakings. It will take a lot of our funding and all of our road money to make these happen. And you'll notice on the right there, food tax is no longer shown as a funding source. So we are trying to plan on how to accomplish these road projects without that money, and that is hopefully dedicated towards the police station construction. So we also will rely on grant projects or grant awards to make these projects happen. The calls for projects through MPO will be incredibly vital to making this happen as well.
The ironic thing is that in Christian's presentation, that 37th Street was noted as the low investment scenario. It's actually $34 million after your investment next year, so it's a $34 million low investment. And then also, and I know as Mark knows, as your representative on the MPO board, there will be a call for projects for 2024 and 2025. We'll be coming back to you in the next couple of work sessions to talk about what that is. A strong candidate, just to give you a hint, would be that 37th Street widening Phase 3 that we're proposing from 65th Avenue East to the western portal of Arrowhead Drive. But certainly we'll await your direction on that one.
Thank you. Like I said, we wrapped up a large amount of road projects in 2 slides there. Are there any questions or any other comments you would like to make on road projects or priorities?
I just want to say that I hope that 22 goes as good as 21 because we have outstanding road improvements and sidewalk improvements, and that was a great job. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to 2022.
Absolutely.
Great.
And I'm looking forward to calls for project, getting that submitted, and hopefully get some money to get some of these projects taken care of. So.
This is just the major amount, specific area budgeted into this, because remember the 2 areas I've been talking to you about?
Yes, those projects are part of our pavement management program, which will come back to you separately within a large chunk of funding.
Okay, that's all I need.
We haven't forgotten you.
So moving forward to our enterprise funds, I'll just hit the highlights here. The water fund will continue to have our NIST allotments or requirements over the next few years built in. That will be a large part of what the water fund is paying for. We also have the water funds component of Idaho Street next year in that construction piece, as well as 37th Street utility piece. So as the enterprise funds are also benefiting from these widening operations and improvements to the utility lines, they are paying their small but fair share as well. And we will also be working on water treatment agreement for securing the treatment for the future of the city. Looking forward, major projects after that, we'll also be doing a major water line replacement at State Farm in 2023. We'll be looking at a water rate study in 2023. That'll be a big undertaking. And then we have various water line replacements slated for 24 and 25 and ongoing as well. In the wastewater fund in 2022, the big one there is the design for the wastewater plant expansion. It's about $4.5 million is what we're anticipating getting started in 2022. We also have some line replacements then for Ashcroft Draw Sewer and Highway 85 water lines. Ongoing annual sewer line maintenance, our solids handling and dewatering you'll see every year as well. Doing an update to our wastewater utility plan that we've spoken about. And then each year we have a small amount that we're setting aside then as well for future expansion of the plant. And you can see some of that in the future projects, as well as some additional major line replacements. And those will be very costly to the wastewater fund as well. As you can see, 23 and 26 is when those are slated, but $2 and $3 million on top of what would be yet to be determined for wastewater plant expansion. These are very, very large dollars as well, so more to come on those. And then lastly, storm drainage over the next 2 years. Big undertaking will be to complete the East Side Storm Drainage Project, that $8.6 million that we had funded through the SRF loan project. Mark is working on design right now and identifying the best use of those dollars and how we can get the most accomplished with that money now. In the future, we'll also be looking at Idaho Streets component that impacts the Storm Drainage Fund, as well as the various phases of 37th Street widening that the Storm Drainage Fund participates in as well. This is another fund where we'll be about maxed out with funding opportunities. So as we're, again, looking at the next phase of improvements, there are many, many millions of dollars of storm drainage improvements on those future unfunded projects lists that we'll need to start to talk about how to fund those and those priorities at that point. But I think with that, close it with any other questions. council. Or...
Questions of staff, keep them pithy.
Oh, I do have one more. I'm so sorry. We talked about a couple of these pieces as well. 2023 and 2025, as we're looking at our financial plans, will be kind of reset years. So those will be years where we have valleys in new projects. We're allowing the funds to build back a little bit of money so that we can look at additional phases of projects, and we'll be completing some of those large undertakings. So those 2 years are ones that you see less new projects starting in those years. And we're, as we've talked about, the MPO funding and calls for projects, we'll continue to look at what availabilities might come through for federal infrastructure funding, as well as the American Rescue Plan Act funding. So those are two big questions that we don't have all the answers to that can help with funding some of these projects.
Any quick questions of staff on this?
For the sake of time now.
Thank you guys very much.
Want to try?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Julie, how long do you need? A couple minutes?
Yeah, give me a couple.
We'll start the meeting at 7:15.